The effects of Crockett's remarks were immediate. During the lunch recess, the Capitol buzzed with discussion. Lawmakers gathered in clusters, many examining the impact reports Crockett had cited. Outside the chamber, reporters surrounded her. She kept her comments brief. "I believe congressional debate should center on substance, not theater. The American people deserve representatives who focus on real governance." Meanwhile, Gaetz was nowhere to be found. His aides told reporters he had pressing meetings and was unavailable for comment, a notable silence from a lawmaker typically. Eager to engage with the press after contentious exchanges, the true turning point came later that afternoon. As members reconvened, a senior Republican on the Education and Workforce Committee requested recognition. "Mr. Speaker," he began, "in light of the district impact data presented this morning, I believe our committee should reconvene to review specific provisions of H.R. 4762 before moving to a floor vote." This appeal, from within the very party sponsoring the legislation, signaled remarkable validation of Crockett's critique. Several other Republicans soon echoed the sentiment, particularly those representing districts facing severe educational funding losses. "I've reviewed the analysis shared by Representative Crockett," another Republican admitted, "and the projected effects on rural schools in my district are deeply concerning. I cannot in good conscience support this bill as currently written." The wave of reconsideration was unprecedented for legislation expected to pass strictly along party lines. Recognizing they no longer had the votes, the bill's sponsors reluctantly agreed to return it to committee for revision. For Gaetz, the fallout extended well beyond this single bill. Clips of Crockett exposing his poor attendance and lack of legislative achievements circulated rapidly across social media and major news outlets. Local newspapers in his Florida district ran front-page stories questioning his effectiveness as a representative. "Performance or representation?" read the headline in Pensacola's leading paper, alongside a detailed report scrutinizing Gaetz's record in Congress. An analysis of Gaetz's committee attendance and legislative record compared with other Florida representatives revealed concerning trends. The most damaging disclosure centered on his absences from education committee meetings, often while attending campaign fundraisers. This revelation struck a chord with constituents already worried about local school funding. Within days, his office was inundated with calls and emails demanding answers. At first, Gaetz tried to dismiss Crockett's criticisms as typical partisan attacks. However, this standard defense failed when confronted with the verified facts she presented. Even his loyal media supporters struggled to justify his performance when shown the documented attendance and voting data. The turning point came a week later when the district's largest teachers association announced plans to meet with potential challengers for the next election. This unprecedented step, coming from a group that had previously stayed neutral in Republican primaries, marked a major shift in local politics. Realizing the potential threat to his re-election, Gaetz hastily organized a town hall in his district. Yet this time, instead of his usual confident, headline-seeking demeanor, he appeared markedly different. He came prepared with specific education proposals and spent most of the session listening to voters' concerns rather than delivering political talking points. It was like he suddenly understood that he had to actually do the work, not just talk about it, observed a local civics teacher who attended the meeting. The effects of the exchange extended beyond Gaetz himself. Other lawmakers, particularly those known for chasing media attention, began adjusting their approach to committee work and floor debates. The Crockett-Gaetz confrontation had exposed a new political risk for representatives neglecting substantive duties. Committee chairs soon reported better attendance, especially from habitual absentees. Several members previously known for fiery interruptions became noticeably more disciplined, now arriving with targeted policy critiques instead of general attacks. Most notably, the House Education and Workforce Committee reconvened to revise H.R. 4762, incorporating several amendments that restored funding for key programs highlighted by Crockett. When the revised bill passed, it safeguarded Title I and special education funding that had been left out of the original version. For Crockett, the aftermath brought a surge of influence. Lawmakers from both parties began seeking her expertise on education issues, recognizing her command of the subject. Her detailed, evidence-based approach to legislative work soon became a model for newer representatives aiming to earn credibility through results rather than rhetoric. 6 months later, the full impact became clear when new committee assignments were announced. Once considered a rising star, Gaetz was conspicuously absent from the Education and Workforce Committee, a clear demotion reflecting his diminished standing. His replacement was a freshman Republican with a background in school administration, who had promised voters to prioritize meaningful education reform over political showmanship. The message from party leadership was unmistakable. Media-driven politics might attract attention, but sustained influence and re-election depended on tangible work and responsiveness to constituents. What began as a brief floor confrontation between Representatives Crockett and Gaetz evolved into a defining example of political accountability, reverberating far beyond Washington. 18 months after their exchange, its effects continued to shape both congressional behavior and broader political dialogue. For Gaetz, the consequences were severe. The scrutiny initiated by Crockett's rebuttal led journalists to uncover broader issues throughout his 7-year tenure: frequent absences, abandoned initiatives, and a pattern of favoring publicity over public service. Ultimately, Gaetz faced a formidable primary challenger in the following election, a rarity for an incumbent once considered politically untouchable. In a solidly Republican district, the incumbent faced an unexpected challenge. His opponent, a retired Navy officer and former school board member, built his campaign around a straightforward idea: representation over performance. "Our district deserves someone in Washington who actually shows up to work every day," the challenger declared during his announcement speech. "Committee meetings aren't optional. Voting isn't optional. The effort to craft legislation isn't optional. These are the basic duties of the job." Local outlets, which had once given wide coverage to Gaetz's bold statements, began comparing his national media presence to his weak attendance record in Congress. The Pensacola News-Journal even launched a weekly accountability feature, tracking Florida Representatives Committee participation, voting records, and legislative achievements. When the primary results were announced, the outcome stunned political observers nationwide. Gaetz, who had previously dominated his primary by more than 30 points, lost by a narrow margin of just 3.2%. It was a political earthquake in a district where incumbent defeats were nearly unheard of. In his concession speech, a humbled Gaetz admitted the message behind his loss. "I went to Washington to disrupt the system," he said, "but somewhere along the way I may have confused disruption with distraction. My constituents have made their expectations clear." For Representative Crockett, however, the aftermath marked a very different transformation. Instead of using her elevated profile for viral moments, she focused on substantive legislative work. Her office became recognized for detailed policy analyses that lawmakers from both parties consulted before major votes. What Representative Crockett demonstrated wasn't just a tactical win in debate, noted one congressional studies professor. She introduced a new model for freshman success, one grounded in expertise, not theatrics. Her example deeply influenced the next class of representatives. Many cited Crockett's method as a blueprint, campaigning on promises to emphasize committee work and legislative substance over media attention. This approach, soon dubbed the Crockett effect, produced measurable changes in Congress. Committee attendance rose sharply. Floor speeches became shorter but more substantive. With an increase in specific policy references and citations, lawmakers arrived at hearings better prepared, often armed with data instead of vague talking points. "We're witnessing a return to a more substantive Congress," observed a veteran House parliamentarian. "In an age of public records and instant fact-checking, performance without preparation has real consequences." Outside of Congress, the moment sparked broader reflection on democratic accountability. In an era of performative politics, civic education programs began using footage of the Crockett-Gaetz exchange to teach students the difference between sounding good and doing the work. Students must recognize the difference between a representative who performs and one who produces, said a high school civics teacher. That exchange perfectly illustrates why the distinction matters. The confrontation revealed several enduring lessons about effective representation. First, it showed that knowledge and preparation remain powerful tools even in a soundbite era. Crockett proved that mastery of facts and policies can defeat even the most polished rhetoric. Second, it highlighted how technology and open data have strengthened political accountability. Gaetz's absences and voting record, once buried in committee logs, were now publicly verifiable. Third, it reminded voters that despite political divisions, most citizens still expect their representatives to do their jobs. The defeat of a strong conservative in a Republican stronghold demonstrated that diligence and service can rise above ideology. Finally, the episode emphasized that democratic renewal often comes not through revolution, but through example. One representative's dedication to substance had quietly reshaped congressional culture. As one civic engagement advocate reflected, it's a reminder that real accountability depends on citizens judging their representatives by the work they do, not the headlines they make. Crockett's example proved that when performance politics meets genuine governance, substance can still prevail. 2 years later, during debate on another education funding bill, the legacy of that confrontation surfaced again. In committee markup, a freshman representative challenged a senior member's amendment by citing specific laws and district data, mirroring Crockett's approach. When asked about her inspiration, the Congresswoman replied, "I watched that Crockett-Gaetz exchange during my campaign and promised myself, I'll be a Crockett, not a Gaetz. People deserve representatives who do the work, not just talk about it." For students of government, the exchange remains a vivid example of how democratic systems self-correct when showmanship is exposed to factual scrutiny. As polarization continues to push politics toward team-based conflict, Crockett demonstrated that clear evidence and preparation can still cut through the noise. This, one civics teacher told her students while showing the footage, is what democracy looks like. We can disagree strongly, but our debates only matter when they're grounded in facts and real engagement. When lawmakers choose performance over substance, they don't just fail their voters, they fail democracy itself. If you found this exploration of congressional accountability insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on how our democratic institutions truly function and why substance will always outlast performance. Sensing his mistake, Gaetz attempted to recover. "Will the gentlewoman yield for a response?" he asked. "I yield for a question as is proper under House rules," Crockett replied. "The gentlewoman is misrepresenting my record," Gaetz said, now defensive. "I've been a strong advocate for education reform." "Point of order, Mr. Speaker," Crockett interrupted. "The gentleman said he had a question. This appears to be a speech." "The gentlewoman is correct," the Speaker ruled. "Does the gentleman have a specific question?" Momentarily flustered, Gaetz tried to pivot. "My question is whether the gentlewoman acknowledges that this bill increases flexibility for local school districts to allocate resources as they see fit, rather than follow federal mandates." It was a predictable talking point, and Crockett was ready. "I appreciate the question," she said evenly. "It gives me the opportunity to address the so-called flexibility claim directly. This bill doesn't simply provide the proposal, framed as flexibility, effectively shifts financial responsibility onto local districts while simultaneously cutting overall funding." Holding up another document, she continued, "I have here the impact analysis for Escambia and Santa Rosa counties within the gentleman's district. Under this bill, maintaining current educational services would require local property taxes to rise by nearly 17% to offset the federal funding shortfall. Is that the flexibility the gentleman refers to? The choice between cutting vital services or increasing taxes on his own constituents?" Crockett's precise response left little space for rhetorical maneuvering. By highlighting the direct consequences for Gaetz's own district, she turned an abstract policy debate into a tangible issue impacting the very voters he represented. Gaetz, visibly uneasy, remained silent as Crockett systematically deconstructed the bill's provisions and their real-world implications. She proceeded to explain how the legislation would affect rural schools, special education programs, and teacher development initiatives, backing each claim with direct citations from the bill and supporting data. Concluding her remarks, Crockett stated, "Mr. Speaker, I came to Congress to address real challenges facing American families, not to perform for cameras or social media. When representatives interrupt without reading the legislation or attending committee meetings, they show disregard not only for their colleagues but for the citizens who elected them. Collecting her documents, she added, "I welcome a meaningful discussion on education policy with any member who has studied this bill and its consequences. But I cannot engage with performative interruptions from those more focused on going viral than on governing." As Crockett's time expired, the chamber did not respond with the usual partisan cheers or jeers. Instead, a rare silence settled as members from both parties absorbed what they had witnessed. Not just a political clash, but a critique of the growing culture of performative politics in Congress. For Gaetz, the encounter marked an unusual and humbling moment in his congressional career. His usual confrontational tactics had not only failed but backfired, revealing weaknesses in his record that would be hard to deflect or dismiss. The House chamber hummed with energy as Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the podium. The debate over education funding had grown increasingly tense throughout the morning, with clear partisan divides. C-SPAN cameras moved across the floor, showing rows of lawmakers, some focused intently, others scrolling through their phones or tablets. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett began, her tone steady and deliberate, "I rise today to address the serious funding shortages confronting public schools in underserved communities nationwide. In my Texas district, schools face deteriorating buildings, outdated textbooks, and a lack of support for special education programs." She paused briefly, glancing at her notes. "The bill before us today proposes to cut federal education funding by 12%, compared to last year, on a move that would disproportionately impact the nation's most vulnerable, students. Will the gentlewoman yield for a question?" came a voice from across the floor. She replied coolly, "I yield for a question, not a speech." Her composed demeanor contrasted sharply with Gaetz's smirking confidence. "My question is simple," Gaetz said, his tone laced with condescension. "Since the gentlewoman is so concerned about education, perhaps she could enlighten us on which page of this bill she finds these supposed cuts that would harm her constituents. Or is she simply reading what her staff prepared for her today?" The chamber fell silent. Interruptions during floor speeches weren't rare, but the personal nature of Gaetz's remark broke an unspoken rule of congressional conduct. All eyes turned to Crockett, who stood still at the podium for a brief moment. What happened next would dominate political headlines for weeks and permanently alter the course of Gaetz's congressional career. Before we break down this pivotal exchange that reshaped the tone of Congress, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more coverage of key political moments, often overlooked by mainstream media. Representatives Jasmine Crockett and Matt Gaetz represented two completely different styles of congressional service and political communication. Matt Gaetz had built his brand through bold statements and steadfast loyalty to former President Trump. First elected in 2016 to represent Florida's 1st District, he quickly became one of the most controversial yet media-savvy members of Congress. His confrontational approach kept him in the headlines, making him a regular on cable news and an active presence on social media, where his provocative remarks often went viral. Gaetz treats Congress like a stage, one congressional analyst observed. He values viral moments and attention over tangible policy results. Indeed, despite multiple terms, Gaetz had few major legislative accomplishments. According to official records, he had introduced over 40 bills, but only one, renaming a post office in his district, had become law. His real influence came from his media dominance and ability to energize his supporters through confrontation and controversy. His personal conduct, however, drew consistent scrutiny. He faced several ethics investigations, including one by the House Ethics Committee, over allegations of sexual misconduct, drug use, and misuse of campaign funds, claims he strongly denied. Though never formally charged, these issues lingered, making him a divisive figure even within his own party. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, represented a sharply contrasting philosophy. A former civil rights attorney, she joined Congress after serving in the Texas state legislature. Her legal experience shaped her disciplined, evidence-based approach to policymaking. While deeply committed to progressive ideals, Crockett distinguished herself by grounding her advocacy in detailed policy knowledge and research. Representative Crockett treats the House floor like a courtroom, a colleague explained. She comes armed with evidence, anticipates counter-arguments, and constructs her case step by step, without relying on theatrics. This fundamental difference in style had led to increasingly tense exchanges between the two. Gaetz, known for his interruptions and media flair, had begun targeting Crockett's speeches more frequently. Observers noted that Gaetz seemed particularly intent on derailing her presentations, likely recognizing how her fact-driven approach exposed weaknesses in his performance-based tactics. The now infamous House session in question focused on H.R. 4762, the Educational Opportunity and Excellence Act, a Republican-sponsored bill proposing major changes to federal education funding. Republicans described it as an effort to reduce inefficiency and return power to local authorities. Democrats, however, warned that it would result in severe cuts to essential educational programs. Throughout the debate, lawmakers from both sides delivered predictable party-line arguments. Republicans highlighted the elimination of wasteful bureaucracy and promotion of local control, while Democrats emphasized the loss of funding for specific programs and communities. What set Crockett's speech apart was her preparation. Rather than repeating talking points, she had reviewed the 341-page bill in detail, line by line, identifying provisions and calculating their exact impact on school districts nationwide, including those in Republican areas. Her team produced data-driven reports showing how the legislation would affect each district, including Gaetz's own in Florida. Equally significant, Crockett had studied Gaetz's record on education, documenting his votes, committee participation, and the disparity between his public rhetoric and legislative action. As one staff member put it, Representative Crockett doesn't just write remarks, she builds a case. The camera turned to show Representative Matt Gaetz, standing with a smirk at his microphone. Without waiting for Crockett's response, he continued, "I'm curious whether the gentlewoman from Texas has even read the bill she's criticizing, because it sounds like she's more focused on repeating party lines than understanding basic budget arithmetic." Gaetz's interruption stirred murmurs on both sides of the aisle. The speaker pro tempore turned toward Crockett. "Does the gentlewoman yield?" Crockett hesitated, scanning the chamber before replying. Crockett was prepared for every possible challenge, almost like a chess player planning several moves in advance. What no one in the chamber realized, including Gaetz himself, was that his interruption didn't disrupt her presentation. Instead, he had stepped directly into a trap she had carefully planned, anticipating exactly this kind of dismissive challenge. As Crockett stood at the podium, calmly considering her response, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the core difference between performance politics and real governance, one that would redefine both representatives' careers. Adjusting her glasses, Crockett looked directly at Gaetz. "I thank the gentleman from Florida for his question," she began, her tone measured but confident. "To answer directly, yes, I have read the entire bill, all 341 pages. The education funding cuts begin on page 73, section 1042, and continue through page 189. They include a 22% reduction to Title I funding for low-income schools, the removal of the Striving Readers Literacy Program, and a 17% cut to special education grants." She lifted a document from the podium. "Here is a district-by-district impact report showing how these cuts affect every congressional district, including the gentleman's own in Florida. Escambia County schools would lose about $8.2 million in federal support, impacting more than 15,000 students." The chamber fell silent as Crockett addressed the challenge with precision and evidence. But she wasn't finished. "Since the gentleman questioned whether I've read the bill," she continued, "perhaps we should review his own engagement with it." She paused briefly. According to committee attendance records, Representative Gaetz missed 7 of the 9 Education and Workforce Committee meetings where this bill was discussed. Quiet murmurs spread across the room. "In fact," she added, "the Congressional Research Service reports that the gentleman from Florida has missed 61% of Education Committee meetings since taking office, one of the highest absentee rates in Congress." Gaetz's confident smirk disappeared, replaced by concern. Crockett was not only defending herself, she was confronting his record head-on with verifiable facts. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "while questioning my preparation, the gentleman might reflect on his own record. In 7 years in Congress, he has not authored a single education bill that received a committee vote, much less became law." The room erupted with murmurs. Gaetz tried to interject, but Crockett held control. "Mr. Speaker, I did not interrupt the gentleman. I would appreciate the same courtesy." The Speaker nodded, and Gaetz stepped back. "What's more troubling," Crockett went on, "is that while questioning my knowledge, records show the gentleman was attending a fundraising event at Mar-a-Lago during the bill's markup session. FEC filings indicate he has held 17 fundraisers during scheduled Education Committee meetings." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So, when the gentleman asks if I've read the bill, yes, I have. The more relevant question is, has he?" The mood in the chamber shifted. Even Republican members who usually backed Gaetz now looked uneasy as Crockett detailed his record. Some reviewed the district analysis, realizing the education cuts would harm their own constituents.